So we've now got a terrific treat. We're going to listen to Ruth Davis, who gave, I thought, a really inspiring speech this morning. I think it was cracking, really enjoyable. I could have listened to her for a long time. And we have another 30 minutes with Ruth now, which is great. So I'm really delighted to welcome Ruth. I hope you're there, Ruth, as we talk about trusting your inner voice, building confidence as a leader. So fingers crossed. There we go.
Hi.
The technology works perfectly, doesn't it? What was I worried about? Ruth, it's really good to see you again, and I'm so grateful for you sparing another half an hour in your busy schedule to talk to us about listening to your inner voice. I know it's something that you've talked about quite a bit, actually. May I just start with the first question, then, if that's okay, Ruth? That this morning you referred to listening to and trusting your inner voice. Can you share what you mean by that and why it can be difficult to hear that inner voice sometimes, especially at the moment?
Yes, I know. We're going to move on to talk about confidence in a while, and I have to pay tribute to the fantastic Marika who has come before me, and I could have listened to her all afternoon. And she spoke at length and so eloquently about our need to really assign a value to ourselves and the job that we do. And I think if ever there was a time to listen to our inner voice, it's now. Marika said, she talked about listening to things that don't always make sense. And I think if something sounds like it doesn't make sense, it probably doesn't make sense. And we have to have the confidence to dial down that background noise and understand the value that we are bringing to the decision-making process that our job and our roles necessarily involve. And, you know, why is that being curtailed? I guess we have decades of approaches to leadership where we believe that someone somewhere is doing it better than we are. That is the sort of overriding quiet message at the back of our heads, that someone somewhere is doing it better than we are. And we never quite know who that person is or where they're doing it better or how they're doing it better. But there is nothing like that nagging doubt at the back of your mind to downplay your own inner voice. And it's that inner voice that often brings you the common sense that is needed for a situation. I think, you know, that the business of taking a learner from A to B, it's complex. It's not an easy business. And I think sometimes those who are not familiar with the business, it presents as something as understandably unfathomable. And so sometimes to apply control to outcomes, administrations, whether they are local or regional or national, will often reduce those processes to a form that they understand. And those forms often have very little to do with pedagogical understanding of how learners actually progress from A to B. And I think as a profession, we have surrendered control. We've surrendered a considerable knowledge and skill base into the hands of those who actually could do with listening. And I think it comes back to that risk-taking, being confident about, not confident about always getting it right, but that it's okay sometimes to get it wrong. And that inner voice that builds year by year actually has a lot of value.
That is so empowering to hear. And I wished I'd heard that in my first year of headship, particularly when the person whose opinion and thoughts and validation really I needed least and valued least was mine. And yet it should have been the one that I perhaps in some ways valued the most. And I'm kind of learning that now, but it takes a while. Well, we've spoken in the past, and you actually just referred to it then, actually, briefly, I heard you say. We've talked about the high blame, low risk taking culture that seems to have built up in schools. How do we change this, Ruth? How do we change that? How do we turn it so that it isn't that high blame, high stakes, and therefore low risk?
Goes back to that inner voice, doesn't it? And I think from you, as I said this morning, I personally have learned far more from the mistakes and the errors that I've made than from my successes. But you need license to try things out.
Yes.
And you need to, and that involves trust, because I spoke at length this morning about trust as well. We've talked a lot today about teaching being a craft. And if teaching is a craft, leadership is an art form. And to get that art form right, it doesn't come with a handbook. We have to have the flexibility and the natural curiosity to test it out and to test out various measures and various approaches. We need to change the cultures within our schools as well. There's a message here for school leaders as well. If we want that license to test things out and to be given the freedom to make mistakes, then that is the sort of culture that we should be looking to generate within our schools. We should be looking to empower teams. We should be looking to empower teams to actually take those risks, to do the testing out. And yes, always you're accountable, and always the learners and their families deserve the very, very best. But the route to gaining that very, very best is often testing issues out and testing ideas out. Otherwise, we keep standing still. And what is that lovely phrase? You keep doing what you're doing, you keep getting what you've always got. And I think in terms of pushing that a little bit further, I think we have to look at compliance. I think we've got a very compliant profession. I've got an issue with compliance, because if you just comply, what you don't do is think, and you don't think for yourself. And as I said earlier, this role does not come with a handbook. And I think at this moment in time, if your default button is latched at the moment to compliance, well, what better time to reboot it? Test it out.
Wow, that's so profound. Now's the time, isn't it? What better time to do that? Gosh, so I'm just thinking about what you're saying, and it's so true. Just to remind everybody, this is being recorded, so if you're furiously trying to note this down, as I was trying to do, you'll have an opportunity to hear that. You've talked, you mentioned it then, and you mentioned it certainly this morning, a lot about the importance of trust. Trusting in school leaders so that they can take bold and creative decisions. And I know from speaking to you in the past, creativity in education is very important to you. How do you think we can build trust and confidence in our profession? Why do you think it's eroded a bit, and how do we rebuild that? And as president of the NAHT, you have a leading role in that. So how, no pressure, how are we going to do that?
Well, first of all, it's realising that there's a lot to be trusted. And the second part of your question is about why is it eroded? I'd be bold enough to suggest that we've let it.
Right.
We've let it be so. We're the most trusted profession, so the polls tell us. We're far more trusted than politicians. I know that. But if ever there was a time to capitalise on that trust, it's now. I spoke this morning about us finding out that the schools, we found out, guess what? They were never just about education. This huge welfare gap that was thrown up by the crisis that we've encountered over the last few months. It is school leaders, it is school staff that have stepped into that breach to fill the gaps. And as I said, if ever there was a moment to show just why schools and their staff should be trusted, it's now. I think, we're the last bastions, I've said it before, we're the last bastions of rights, respect and behaviours. It often feels like that. We've shown our capacity to influence not just our communities, but whole generations of learners. That capacity is immense. What's there not to trust? Just look at the burden of hopes and aspirations our school staff are balancing at the moment. We're teaching children, we're making sure they're safe, we're feeding them. We're filling the gaps for their families. What's there not to trust? And more importantly, why aren't we more confident about trusting ourselves? And, going on to the second part of your question, Andrew, I would be bold enough to suggest that one of the reasons it's been eroded is because we've allowed it to be. I think our focus is always, we're not brilliant at singing our own praises. Our focus is always on the needs of the learner, the rights of the learner, and so it should be, don't get me wrong. But we've grown accustomed to letting it go, in the words of the great song, let it go. And sometimes that is right. We feel there is more to be gained for our learners by retaining the conversation in the corridors of power than withdrawing from them. And so we're looking continually at a strategy where we can keep those conversations going. But we have a duty to ourselves as well, and the generation of leaders that are following up behind us, to sometimes state the bleeding obvious that we're doing a phenomenal job. We're doing a phenomenal job in keeping society together in the face of so many other forces seemingly intent on ripping it apart. As I said, Andrew, what's there not to trust?
Amen to that. And there'll be an awful lot of people, and we've seen on the chats already, there's a lot of people saying well said, Ruth. There's a lot of people saying well said, and I concur with that hugely. Creativity is important to you. I know that from previous conversations we've had. And as a very experienced school leader yourself, how have you managed to hold on to your own creativity? Because you've got many different roles. You're president of the NAHT. You're still a practicing head teacher. And I'm getting a sense, I haven't visited your school. I'd love to visit your school, but I haven't visited it yet. And I get a sense that you still have retained your creative energy and your passion and your willingness to take risks. How have you done it? How do you keep your creative energy? How do you stop it from waning?
Well, Marika spoke earlier about that, the quality of being naturally curious.
Yes.
Naturally curious about the next step.
Yep.
And I think, what we have to realise that however experienced we are, we will continually come up against new problems. Now, what this role doesn't come with, as I said just a minute or two ago, is it doesn't come with a handbook. What it does come with is people with lots of opinions about what you should do and more importantly, what you shouldn't have done. And within that setting, you continually confront problems that not only have they never met before, but you haven't. Even now, 30 years on, I'm still confronting problems or being confronted by problems that I've never really confronted before. So you have to be creative. The only way forward is to apply a creative solution to the task in front of you. I wouldn't want you to, what I'm painting here is almost a landscape of a career that's followed a natural trajectory upwards. No, the role of leader, more than anyone, I would say, is littered with pits and more worryingly plateaus. It's the flat times that I've struggled with through my career, not just the major pits where something major has happened and you've had to find out. And it's at those times that you have to bring a creative solution. So a creative solution doesn't mean that you're continually fired up all of the time, but maintaining that natural curiosity and the belief in the value of the job that you're endeavouring, and making sure that you still quite enjoy it. And if I were to answer in terms of my own creativity, what really keeps me going, I suppose I've got to say it's a team effort. I've always surrounded myself with a quirky team, teams with the full spectrum of personalities, teams that take the job very seriously, not themselves, not so much for. And it's about building trust and confidence within that team so that they feel at liberty to continue to challenge you. If you came to my school, and you'd be very welcome, Andrew, we'd love to have you there. But, they would tell you about my foibles. My team teases me. I never know where I've put my phone or where my keys are. I'm great at remembering children. I know every child. I'm not so great at adult names and faces. I can never remember who they are. Ask Judy Shaw about that one. And these are just a few of my weak points that I'm willing to confess to in this public setting. As I said, ask my colleagues and friends for more. But they're great at challenging me as well, and constantly making me think my own beliefs and my own lines. And they value me for who I am and what I believe. And because there is that intrinsic value built into the relationship system within the school setting, it gives me license to sometimes get it wrong.
Absolutely.
Yeah? And that creativity then it is able to flow, because we don't have to box problem solving into something that's easy to manage. The great thing about problem solving is that you can apply all manner of new ideas and new thoughts and recycle thoughts and ideas from before as well. And most importantly, the children themselves. That's where you get, you list. They always take you to think outside the box. They're my first port of call. If I've got a problem that needs solving, I will take it to the children. They will always give you an angle that you haven't thought of before. And it is just important to keep rooted in the love of the role and the natural curiosity that comes from that.
Do you know what? I was struck by so many different things that you said then, and I was actually writing something down while you said it because I just loved it, which is that when you get into headship, there's no handbook, just opinions. So true. No handbook, just other people's opinions. I've got loads of questions for you, but I'm actually going to park these, and we're going to take some questions from the people who are viewing this instead, because there'll be an awful lot of people nodding their head and saying amen, I suspect, while you're talking. But I really want to put some of these questions to you because they're really interesting, actually. There's one that's come in here, which I think is a really interesting question, Ruth, which is, how would you support a teacher who is BAME and afraid, nervous about coming back to school? And that's the question, and I'm interpreting that in a couple of different ways. And it may well be that they're particularly nervous about the seemingly heightened chances of contagion through COVID-19 for the BAME community, but perhaps also because of recent events that will be playing on their mind, my goodness, and they will be nervous about that. So what do you think, Ruth? That's a really interesting question, isn't it, to come in?
It is. And, you know, there's no straight answer, is there? But, you know, the question comes from someone who has actually made that first important step. They've owned up to saying it's okay not to feel okay. It's actually okay to sometimes say, well, the children are fine, but I'm not that fine. Yeah. And I think so many, you know, in our very, very rushed communities, and we've touched this morning on why those communities are so busy and rushed, because we're aspiring to other people's, you know, ideas of what we should be and what we should be about. Sometimes that doesn't really correlate with our own. But in the busyness of all that, there is someone here with that question who's taking time out to be brave and say, actually, not only am I not okay, but I've got an emotion called fear.
Yeah.
I know, which one of us has never come across that? And I think fear is a very important, is probably the one uniting emotion that we can all say at some point in our careers, and sometimes, you know, our work days, we've all faced up to. And I think in terms of going back to school, whether you are in because what the reference here is to the high risk category or whatever, you're obviously going to feel fearful because you're dealing with things outside of your control. And I've touched on the issue of teams before then, how important more than ever that we have a team that listens, but more importantly, knows how to articulate the fears and how to ask for help. I think, you know, I noticed, if I mentioned this morning, I noticed one of the comments that came up on the chat, and it hit me hard because I thought this is such an honest statement from someone. We had somebody who was listening in, and she'd written, I'm doing nothing effectively at the moment. I'm lurching from one panic to the next in work and at home life. And I thought, what an honest, you know, insight into somebody's current state of mind. And we're all somewhere on that spectrum at the moment. Yeah, we are. And I think realizing that the fear we have isn't just us, and it isn't, you know, it is okay to feel it, and actually dealing with it, the first step is to actually reach out and ask for help and to acknowledge the fear and the sense of inadequacy that, let's face it, we all feel at some point.
Absolutely, and we could talk at length about this question, couldn't we? And I would have loved to have done that, actually. But we may reflect more on this as well, actually, and perhaps address this question again. It's a really fascinating one that's come in, and I'm very grateful to the person to have asked that, and it's made us all really think about that, I think. So we may revisit that one. I've got so many here, and I've got about 5 minutes. But I'd like to ask a few more, if I may. I'm going to start just briefly with a comment, though, that's come in that doesn't require an answer necessarily, but it's a comment from Helen. And I think that you'll recognise this, I hope. We have the power and potential to change the narrative about all the great work we're doing in schools right now. As a profession, we have lots to be proud of, and we need to share this widely. Hear, hear, Helen. I think that's a terrific comment, and I'm sure that'll resonate with you, Ruth. So how can we promote ourselves as professionals and experts in a society that seems to want to contest our value? It's an interesting one.
Yes. And repeat the last bit of that question.
How can we promote ourselves as professionals and experts in a society that seems to want to contest our value, to challenge it?
And it comes back to that inability. It's the inner belief. And to have that inner belief, you have to connect with the critical importance of the job that we're undertaking. You know, it's about honesty. It's not about always knowing the right answer or even the right question. It's not always about wanting to be or needing to be the most listened to voice in a conversation, having the zippiest website or the most avant-garde policies. In all those outward-facing banners that we sometimes place over us, it's sometimes as simple as just being, it's seeing the value in the job that you're undertaking, what you've achieved so far, and that your setting, your normal, has value, whatever that is. And I think in terms of building that inner confidence, we should be stronger about pushing back. As I said at the start, I've got an issue about compliance. I don't think we need to always perhaps comply as easily as we do. And we just need to understand that this complex business and it's not just about education, as we have found out, it's about running communities that make a difference for generations of learners. That is a massive undertaking and a real successful one as well.
And do you think that this current crisis that we've been through, which has been harrowing, frightening, unsettling, and all those different things, it really has been. But do you think that at least one beacon of hope here, one positive that will come out of this hiatus, at best it's been far worse than a hiatus for some, is that now is the time that we can reset that and we can actually redefine redefine our role, our position, the trust that we have. Do you know what I mean? Is now a time to do that?
And to reapply our voice. You know, we really are the joiners up in a community at the moment that is falling apart. And we have to look really solidly at not just what we've achieved so far, but our potential to impact going forward in the future. We're great at plans. Ruling administrations don't seem to be that great at the moment. And I think we need to forge forward, because ultimately what joined us all together is a genuine concern for the interests and the needs of the generation of learners that we take responsibility for. Yes.
Gosh, again, we could talk about that for ages. I've got so many questions. I've been absolutely thrilled with the number of questions that have come in for you, Ruth. There's one here which I think is really interesting, and we haven't really covered it. Paul touched it briefly this morning. It appears that the internal world of education isn't mirrored in any way other than through distortion in the media. How do we align the two, the perception of education delivered through the media and the reality of what it's like internally within the world of education? Well, that's a tricky one, isn't it?
I mean, the media is a whole new business, you know. Happier headlines don't sell newspapers, I guess. And I think Paul described them this morning as lazy headlines. But it's absolutely, you know, it's keeping the sense of integrity and the value of the job that we're doing going, even in the light of all that background noise. And it's coming back to the first question that we talked about, which is about dialing out that background noise and maintaining the pathway in terms of managing. We have a message. We have a message of that brings hope, that talks about values and so forth. And we have to make sure that that is dialed up to the top, and that we just have to carry on regardless. You know, I don't believe that the media necessarily reflects the views of the broader community, I have to say. I don't think they do. You know, you only have to look at the surveys in terms of, for instance, parental response to homeschooling. And they certainly, you know, in terms of understanding how complex this business is of educating, and also the gratitude and response for all the other holes within the community that schools have stepped in to fill. So I think, you know, it's easy to be drawn to the negative. It's what we do. If we do a survey in school and we have out of 100 responses, we have 99 that are positive, we will not automatically gravitate to the one that's negative. But it's important for us not to do that now, and to consciously look at the difference that we're making, look at the difference to the children. And, you know, I'm going to say one last thing in terms of that as well. No one is talking to the learners. No one's asking the learners or the children what they think and what they feel. And I've just read a survey over the last week that took account of nearly 24,000 children and young people's responses to the current crisis. And without exception, the continual theme all the way through, the one thing that was making the most positive difference for each and every one of them was the role of their school and of their teachers.
Wow. Wow, that really makes you think, doesn't it? That really makes you think. Right, I'd love to think some more about that, but I have to drive this. Yeah, Ruth, thank you so much. I mean, there's so many more questions. We've had more questions for this session than any of the others. I mean, we've had lots of questions all day, but so many coming in. We're going to try our absolute best to get these questions to Ruth. And if you have the time to respond to some of these, and our colleagues, I'm sure you will. So thank you so much to those who are watching who've got all those questions in. We're going to send them on to Ruth, and I'm so appreciative. Being president of the NAHT is difficult and challenging, though rewarding, I'm sure, at any time. But at the moment, having just taken on the presidency in this current time, though it's challenging for you, I cannot think of a better person to be the president of the NAHT at the moment. So we're so thrilled. Thank you so much for joining us today. And I hope at some stage today you get some time off. But thanks again for joining us, Ruth. It's been really nice to see you. Really nice to talk to you again.